If your acrylic landscapes always look flat and lifeless, you're not alone. Most artists that I coach struggle with colour mixing and depth when they first start. I've been painting landscapes for over 20 years, shown my work in galleries and taught hundreds of artists how to get past these exact problems. In this video, I'll show you step by step how I painted this mountain landscape in acrylics using loose impressionistic brushwork that still looks realistic. And I'll share a couple of colour mixing tricks that you can instantly bring your paintings to life. So the scene that I'm painting here is a view of a mountain called Mount Clark in southern New Zealand. And I have a fond memory of this place because I was out painting on plein air with a group of artists and it was a fantastic day. So ever since then I've been wanting to do a studio painting of this, and I thought, you know what, why not paint this in acrylics? Most of the time I normally paint with oils, but more recently I've been trying out acrylic paintings again and just seeing what effects I can get. So right now I'm just sketching out the composition using burnt sienna and just marking out the main areas, main planes of the composition. Now I did also design this composition before I started painting in my sketchbook. The sketching part is a non-negotiable for me. I always start my studio paintings by sketching first so that I can plan the composition. I'm also painting on a wooden panel here, which I've also applied a couple of layers of gesso to as well. I prefer painting on a white background as I've found that it's helped me to establish my values a lot better and really set out the whole structure of the painting in terms of tonality. Now value is how light or dark your subject is, and we'll find our lightest lights and our darkest darks in the foreground. Yeah, as landforms recede, darks aren't as dark and lights aren't as light. I'm also trying to use the biggest brushes that I can get away with here, so that I'm doing big bold brush marks. And the colours that I've been using so far are combinations of ultramarine blue with burnt sienna, titanium white and alizarin crimson. And as I move into the distance, I've been adding more titanium white into the mix, but generally keeping the mixtures more on the blue side. A lot of shadows, especially in New Zealand and in the mountains, tend to have a blue cast to them. So this is something that I want to convey from the get-go in this painting. Now, I am using, as I said, the biggest brushes that I can get away with, and that's so that I can have nice loose gestural brush marks. And one of the things I decided to do with my acrylic painting is generally paint in a more loose style, so that really I'm just capturing the feeling and essence of the places that I'm painting, but also I want to convey realism as well. So in this case I'm not painting detail, but I still consider this realism. By using flat brushes and big flat brushes as well, I'm going to get these nice bold gestural marks. Now the brushes I'm using are Shiraz brushes and they're made by Rosemary & Co, and if you want to get some Rosemary & Co brushes, I've put a link in the description box below. I've been using them for years and they're really nice to paint with. So now I've got the tonal framework established. I started from the furthest element away, which is the sky and clouds, and I was painting the sky using a combination of ultramarine blue with some titanium white and a little phthalo green, and just painting that in. One of the things I have to consider with acrylics is that they dry quickly, so there wasn't really that much opportunity for blending colours. And the other thing as well is acrylics tend to dry darker, so although I started off quite a bit lighter, I was accounting for the fact that they were going to dry darker. However, they didn't dry as dark as I thought they would, so I had to go back and just add some more layers of paint and just darken up some of those shadows, but that's absolutely fine. The cool thing about acrylics is they dry super quickly. Now, as I said, I'm just not worrying about detail in these paintings at all. I just want to capture the feeling of the scene. So once I'd re-established those shadows, and again using the same colours as I was before, ultramarine blue, burnt sienna to desaturate, titanium white and a little alizarin crimson, I then moved on to painting the water, and generally I was using combinations of ultramarine blue, titanium white, yellow ochre and phthalo green. Now the cool thing about painting a subject such as mountains is if you've been struggling with creating depth and distance in your painting, then mountains are a great subject to paint because you often have lots of tiers of depth. For example, In the foreground here, we got some really dark values. So value being how light or dark your subject is. So we've got these dark values in the trees, and trees tend to be some of the darkest values in the landscape. There's also some shadows along the riverbank that are pretty dark. But then across from the river on the left side of the painting are some tiers of mountains. So we're seeing the base of the mountains here. But the shadows in these mountains are going to be pretty dark because they're still relatively close to the viewer. But then as you go into the distance, those shadows are going to be getting lighter. And so it's a way that you can create tiers of depth in your painting. And it looks really awesome in mountain landscapes. Now I was using the same combinations of colours, but generally just adding more titanium white as I moved into the distance with these mountains so that they look further away. I always keep in mind that we'll find the darkest darks and the lightest lights in the foreground. Then as landforms recede, the darks aren't as dark and the lights aren't as light. Whenever I paint, whether I'm painting in oils or acrylics or even gouache, I'm always thinking about the value, because the value is what creates the depth and distance in the paintings. So long as you're getting your values correct, it doesn't matter so much that maybe you haven't quite mixed the right colour, so long as the values are working. But if your values aren't working as well, then you could end up with a pretty flat looking painting. Now the reason I talk about tonal values so much in my videos is because this was the thing that I was struggling with before I got an art mentor who pointed out the problems that I was having, because I often ended up creating a load of flat looking paintings and I couldn't figure out why. And at the time, you know, I didn't really read any art books or anything like that. I just thought I could figure it out on my own through trial and error. But that was the thing that was the game changer for me, as well as other things as well, such as composition and colour mixing. But the values and learning about how they worked was the real key thing that really changed my paintings, and I was able to start creating that sense of depth and distance in my paintings. And to be honest, when I had it explained to me properly, I picked it up very quickly. Like, my paintings literally improved in about 2 weeks. Now if you've been struggling with creating realism and depth in your paintings, or struggling with tonal values, composition and colour mixing, then come and join me at my art school. We have a weekly live painting class, plus there's loads of painting tutorials to help you to quickly improve your painting skills. And we also have an awesome community of artists there that are sharing their artwork and chatting with each other, so you can meet some like-minded people. The aim of this group as well, apart from the joy of painting, is to help you to improve your artwork quickly, so that if you want to, you could have paintings that are good enough to sell, or just have paintings that you'd be proud to hang on your wall. So come and join me at my art school. I've put the link in the description box below. Now let's just talk about some of the colours that I've been using in this painting. As I said before, I've just been using bold brushwork and pretty large brushes for the size of the painting, mostly flat brushes. Now the greens here in the foreground are going to have the highest saturation here in the painting. So saturation is another word for chroma. So because we've got these grass greens here, they're generally quite high in chroma or saturation, so we can mix a saturated green. And for this I used a little bit of yellow ochre with cadmium yellow, some ultramarine blue and titanium white. This formed the base of my green, and then I mixed in a little bit of cadmium red light and some phthalo green. Now the phthalo green is going to increase the saturation, but it also gives it these emerald grass green tones to it, and it looks really nice. Now if you're going to mix really saturated greens, it's going to work in the foreground, but then as we move into the distance, the intensity of the greens starts dropping out. And if we were to use a green that was as saturated as the grass in the foreground and those greens in the background mountains, then that would pull the mountains forward, and then suddenly we'd lose that depth. So the greens that are in the distant mountains, they have to be desaturated. And the way to do this is to use more titanium white in your mix, but also think about its colour opposite on the colour wheel, which is red. So mixing in a red into the green, that's going to help neutralise the green and desaturate it. So for those very distant greens on the mountain there, I've actually used more of the earth colours such as yellow ochre, ultramarine blue and titanium white as my base green, and then I mixed in a little bit of burnt sienna. Also, you could use alizarin crimson if you wanted to. I also added a tiny bit of phthalo green, but really not too much at all. It's really important that the green is of a low chroma or low saturation, and then that's going to help it to sit back in the landscape. So very important to do this with your greens. Now at this point in the painting I was starting to think about getting it finished. I added more details to the mountains, most notably the snow. So the initial layer of snow that I added, I made it a little bit darker in value by mixing in a small amount of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna and alizarin crimson. So just making that darker meant that I could add lighter layers on top, and it helps to add the depth to the mountains. Now as the mountains aren't too far away, the lights of the snow are actually going to be pretty light, and I was saving my lightest values pretty much until last, which is something that I recommend you do with paintings anyway. So adding those last layers of snow that's in light, I pretty much just used titanium white with a little bit of yellow ochre just to add in those highlights. Then I worked on the water a little more just to convey the movement of the water. It wasn't too fast flowing, but there was definitely a few ripples in there. And then I started adding in a few details to the trees on the right side of the painting. So just using a pointed round brush and painting the suggestion of a few branches. Now as I said, in general I saved my lightest values until last, and I just added some sparkles on the river there just to give it more life and add more realism to it. I finished up this painting by just adding a few last details, a few tonal adjustments and a few details to the mountains, and with that it was complete. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to learn more about acrylic painting, check out this video here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.